now for Inside Utah Politics with Lindsay Aerts.
Well, welcome on into our streaming show today on IUP TV. We're glad you found us. We appreciate that you're here with us. I'm joined today by a couple of local panelists who are going to weigh in on all the topics of the day, and we're about to have a really robust discussion, so I'm excited about it. Joined by Dr. Leah Murray of Weber State University and Taylor Morgan of Morgan & May Public Affairs, a local lobbying and consulting firm.
Not a doctor.
Not a doctor. Nor do you want him to be a doctor, my friend. Stay clear of that. I just took over introducing you, but introduce yourselves. Tell us more about you.
I think you said it.
Yeah.
I'm a partner at a consulting firm. We do politics, we do lobbying, we do campaigns, and I have a lot of thoughts about all of the political news over the last several days.
Yep.
Yeah, and I want to just say that Taylor, I'm pulling him in. He's going to be a professor of practice for us up at Weber State University this fall. Mm-hmm. So maybe when we talk later in a couple of months, he can say, also professor.
Also,
Ooh.
Teacher Taylor.
Teacher Taylor.
I'll take whatever title I can get. I'm very excited about that and excited about the show today.
Let me run through quickly what we're going to hit today. We've had a couple instances of political violence both here locally and across the country, so we want to touch on that today. Our own Senator Mike Lee has gotten in some hot water over some tweets that he sent. We'll discuss some of that.
Do we still call them tweets?
X's,
What are they called?
They're posts.
X's? They're posts?
Since we changed the name, we don't know what to call them.
Nobody knows what to call them.
Because you can't say I re-X'd him. Like, that's not a thing. I retweeted him, right?
I've been trying to make Zeet catch on.
Zeet?
A zeet. Is that the
How's that going,
official?
Not going great.
Not a thing.
But I am saying it.
Is that what Elon wants it to be?
I don't think he's put out a vision for this yet. And, you know, we should have gotten on him when he was a public official about that.
Absolutely.
Stop trying to make Zeet happen, Peter.
Gretchen.
Never going to happen.
Yeah. Okay, so public land sale, something Mike Lee is working on as well. We'll hit on that. And if we have time, we'll get into some local polling on elections and the collective bargaining referendum as well. Producer Peter, you heard from there as well. Welcome, and thanks for being here.
Yes, I am here waiting in the wings.
You have a collar on your shirt today.
I know. Well, I'll do a quick little turn for the camera. Okay.
I think that bottom button is supposed to be.
Listen. It's the summer. I can be a little casual.
You'd have to tuck that
the
shirt
angle's
in too
appropriate.
if you wanted to golf.
Right.
I will pass your complaints along.
Okay, we appreciate you dressing up for the show. All right, let's get into our topics today. First and foremost, we've had some instances of political violence. The Minnesota shootings where a state lawmaker and her husband were killed, and then another state senator and their spouse wounded. And then here locally, we had the No Kings protest shooting, where we're still waiting on potential charges in that case. We were told today by the district attorney's office that there will be 3 more days-ish, excuse me, until we get some sort of potential charges on there. Right now, they are holding a man named Arturo Gamboa, on suspicion of murder. He was not the one who fired the shots, though. It was a peacekeeper with the organization who was armed, and the organization is sort of saying, well, this Gamboa person could have potentially been a threat to the crowd. So all of that to say, we have kind of this unique situation where a man was killed, Afa Alu, 39-year-old local fashion designer, but it wasn't from the person suspected and who's currently being held and on suspicion of murder. So lots to weigh in on there. Leah, maybe I'll just get your take first. Are these one-off instances of political violence, or are we seeing sort of this get worse?
No, I feel that the fact that the organizers of the No Kings protest felt that they needed to have a peacekeeper on site or peacekeepers on site is indicative of these are not one-off instances, that the country is very much veered into, you know, political violence seeming like a viable tool to use trying to make your case. So I am very concerned that these are just symptoms of a systemic issue in this country where we treat people who have different opinions on policy than we do as some kind of monster that allows us to show up with a weapon to hurt them.
Yeah. I want to be very careful here because I have some thoughts and I'm still thinking through my opinions, and there's still a lot we don't know about what happened. I will say that political violence is never okay. I believe in the right to protest. I think that's fundamental to being American. That said, I do see the organizers of this protest making some choices to leverage extremism, calling it the No Kings protest. I think that's a lot more about marketing than it is practical politics.
No kings being a reference to Trump saying that
it's easier
he's
to
not a
market
king.
No Kings. No dictator would be more politically accurate. But again, these folks are trying to get attention. They're trying to create controversy, right? Having a quote unquote peacekeeper there, to me, that was more of that, more marketing, more about trying to leverage what they see as extremism on the far right to build support for what they're trying to do on the left. So both sides, I think, in my opinion, again, I am not justifying political violence in any way, shape, or form, but I see both sides doing problematic things when it comes to political violence.
A little bit too, I wanted to just say, one of the issues I think we have in America is this affective polarization. So you were saying, Taylor, both sides, and people probably know we are on different sides, maybe. But the thing is, what I say is Taylor is a Republican, so I just hate him. Like the affective polarization says, I would rather my child marry someone from a different religion than marry a Republican if I am a Democrat. And he as a Republican has that instant dislike for someone who is a Democrat. So what happens is, I think you're not wrong, that affective polarization is used as a political football to make the case.
By both parties.
Right.
Absolutely.
So instead of being like, let's have an argument about, what did you say we're going to talk about later? Public lands. Instead of having that argument, what we have to say is anyone who disagrees with me, there's something fundamentally wrong with them. So if they're on the right, they're fascist. If they're on the left, they're Marxist. We dehumanize them, and then we can say terrible things about them as a human rather than about the policy that we should be talking about.
And we also use it in our terminology, too. When we describe someone, describe policies as leftist policies, we use that as a pejorative, right? Or we say that person's so MAGA, and so we don't like them, right? None of those are actual, those are labels, right? And you hear it from politicians all the time when they're trying to dissuade the other party's position.
And I think where we really see it, which is when I kind of realized, oh, this is a thing, is now we refer to justices by whether they're Trump appointees or Biden appointees or Obama appointees. Whereas I think, and just correct me if I'm wrong or you interpret this differently, when I was growing up, they were just judges, right? So you were like, you knew that there were conservatives and liberals, but now we actually labeled the judge as an appointee by the president who appointed them. Again, another way of saying, so therefore, whatever jurisprudence came out there must be wrong if it's an Obama appointee or is right if it's a Trump appointee.
And if we're talking about the U.S. Supreme Court specifically, I would argue that justices today are no more beholden to the president that appointed them than they ever have been.
Right.
But for some reason, politicians and the parties are playing that game and labeling them, and the public are responding to it.
Yeah, now we have activist judges as well, too, another label, right? That describes a ruling I don't like, right? They're an activist judge.
Right. What I would like to see this No Kings group doing, instead of these protests that in my eyes are clearly designed all around marketing, because the No Kings is a cute turn of phrase. The idea is to get attention.
You're just
it's
mad
about
you
marketing.
didn't think of it.
Perhaps, because clearly I assume they're cashing in on that, right? They're not making money on this. But what they're not doing is they're not organizing. They're not registering voters. They're not participating in the political process.
So it's very performative politics.
It's performative politics. It is more of the same outrage politics that we have seen from the left over, frankly, the last 8 years. In the end, it's not constructive. They're not impacting anything when it comes to the election process or policy. They're just getting some attention. And unfortunately, political violence has become a part of it. I'm not blaming them for that. But they're not doing anything constructive.
But you know what else, too, I would just kind of add and then see what you both think, is a little people say, well, the left are doing it, so therefore. Or people on the left will say, well, January 6th, so therefore the right started it. And to a certain extent, that's like talking to toddlers, right? You have children, you're like, I don't care who started it. Stop hitting each other, right? So a little bit.
Sounds like the daily conversation in my house. Like,
every day.
I saw you do it.
Right. So the question
Stop touching your brother.
really is like, not who started it, but how about we all just end this bad behavior?
Well, to that point, I wanted to ask, what are the solutions? Because we talked a little bit about, our language, the words we use from politicians. I don't think we're going to see that change from them. What is the solution to lower the temperature, to lower the fact that political violence could be a thing that results from the way we use this language.
Political violence in this country is not new. Again, I'm not excusing it. I'm not justifying it. But I also think that we are reacting to it and talking about it in a way that maybe isn't helpful. I think if we continue to sensationalize political violence, and if we make political violence the driving narrative, it will continue to be.
Right, and I would argue that we need our leaders. So I guess I'm going to call for our leaders to actually be the statesmen they should be, as opposed to using events that happen as political footballs. Maybe we could have our leaders not... What did you call it, Peter? Zeeting? Whatever. Ridiculous.
Zeeting. Yes.
Zeeting?
Okay.
It's holding. Someone else is saying it.
Oh, as in
X-tweeting.
X-tweeting is zeeting because
Yes.
X makes the Z sound.
Is it
That's
an
what we're
X
saying?
tweet if it's on X? I don't know.
So I just sent
I'm
us
so
right down a
confused at this
stupid
point.
rabbit hole, and I
How
do
can we go to
apologize.
Mars, Mr. Musk, if we can't even figure out what to call a post?
Right, but the thing is, I'm a leader, I'm sitting with my phone, something cool comes through my thread, right, through my feed, and then I instantly retweet it or zeet it or whatever, repost it, saying something, because what? So that my followers will get excited.
Yeah.
A little bit I do blame our elite, our leaders more, because people will emulate. That's bad. They're not modeling good civil discourse.
They're in a position of trust.
Correct.
I don't think it's their job to do that. And maybe I am the outlier here, and
Then whose job is it, Taylor?
it's ours. Politicians are not the best of us. They're not the leaders. Politicians are nothing more than a reflection of us. We all have to be better. We can't expect our elected leaders to show us the way because they simply are trying to stay in office and respond to us.
So we need to demand better.
We have to be better first
Okay.
before we expect them to do better.
Interesting. Well, that brings us into our next topic, which is tweets sent by, or zeets, or posts made
Whatever.
by zeets. I like
Whatever
the
they
zeets.
are.
I think this is the most I've successfully derailed an episode. And
We're way down a
it
rabbit
took a
hole
few
on
weeks,
zeets.
but I'm really proud of myself.
Post from the good senator from Utah, Mike Lee, which depicted the shooting out of Minnesota. He posted a picture of the suspect in his mask on presumably the doorstep of one of the lawmakers shot, presumably one of them killed. Basically with the captions, "Nightmare on Wall Street," or "This is what happens when Marxists don't get their way." Many on the internet saw that as mocking the shootings. How did you guys feel about those? And maybe Taylor, I'll start with you, to your point where elected leaders aren't the high level here.
Yeah.
They're not the ones who have to change the speech first. We do.
Yeah.
How do you justify what he said?
I can't justify. As a Utahn and as a Republican, I am embarrassed by Mike Lee. Our entire state is embarrassed by Senator Mike Lee. And Mike Lee has progressively, and I use that word, no pun intended there, but he has become more and more irresponsible, more and more outrageous with the things that he posts lately. I do believe this is simply Mike Lee himself posting directly by himself. There's a clear contrast between his professional elected official social media accounts and the content there versus what he posts himself on Base Mike Lee.
Yeah, and I want to be clear, too, that he's since deleted the posts on Base
Yeah.
Mike Lee, and on his senator page, his official page, he did denounce the political violence both here in Utah and in Minnesota.
And I think we should, I'm glad you point that out because we should applaud that in a sense, but at the same time, Mike Lee has to do better and he has to be held accountable. And I'm embarrassed by Mike Lee. As a Utahn, as a Republican, do better, Senator Lee.
Yeah, and a little bit, it's like whatever made you realize it shouldn't be on your official account, for the record, shouldn't have been on your private account, right? The thing that you said, I need to behave well as a senator, should apply to you as a human.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm still going to demand better from him. I expect more from our elected officials. They have bigger followings. Right? Like there are more people who are following.
Yeah.
There are young people who are like, how do I interact with the humans in my life? Well, this is how I do it. Making fun of someone, making fun of a death within, I mean, it was almost instantly. It felt like really quickly after it happened. That is not okay. It's not acceptable behavior. Again, like talking to a toddler. If you did that, your mom would tell you not to do it, right? So he should stop.
And none of it matters. Sorry, Lindsay, if I can just say, none of this matters unless speaking of we being better and expecting better of Mike Lee, none of this matters if we as Republicans, those of us who are Republicans, don't hold him accountable the next time he's up for election.
Well, to that point, Taylor, none of the Republicans, save I think Blake Moore, have actually spoken publicly about his posts.
Yeah.
So are they doing enough? And my question was going to be, should Mike Lee face any other consequences here short of replacing him at the ballot box?
I think that is the ultimate consequence. That is the way in which he needs to be held accountable. A lot of credit for Blake Moore, for Congressman Moore, and finally someone having the courage in our delegation. I believe the rest of our delegation is silent only because we as their constituents need to set expectations with them.
Can I ask a question, Taylor? I do apologize, Lindsay,
go.
but because you worked in the Senate, do you think there are any consequences, either real, tangible, or even soft? Like, do people in the Senate say, this was so beyond the pale that now he's not in group chats he would expect to be in? Does he get left out of conversations he would expect to be in, right? We all saw that image of the Minnesota senator basically grabbing him in the hallway and going, no, that was not okay. Does that damage him in that chamber?
Just one quick correction. I worked in the House.
Oh, I beg
not
your
on the
pardon.
Senate
I'm sorry.
side, but
Right.
I worked with senators. Unfortunately, Mike Lee has long lacked credibility or trust with his colleagues in the Senate because of this kind of behavior.
But he's
Perhaps
a celebrity
not
among his base.
among his base and amongst a very small group of extremists. He is a hero. And we see that here in Utah at conventions, for example. But he does not reflect the Republican Party in Utah broadly. And he does not represent his colleagues or his caucus in the United States Senate. And frankly, Mike Lee is not at the table when most of the key decisions are being made for this reason. They do not respect him nor trust him, unfortunately. And because of that, it hurts Utah.
We'll have to see how that all shakes out. But speaking of Mike Lee, he's championing another provision in the big, beautiful bill, and that is making some of our public lands eligible for sale. And this is a provision that's getting a lot of consternation among conservation groups, among environmentalists, but also hunters, anglers, fishers, people who generally, if I can paint with a really broad brush, tend to vote on the right in certain, scenarios, have a lot of consternation about this. Now, Mike Lee went on the Glenn Beck show just this morning as we're taping this episode and defended the proposal and tried to correct some what he calls misinformation. He believes that the other side is spreading misinformation about this provision and what it would do. So let's listen to what Mike Lee said just today, as soon as Peter gets to the right place.
Any of the 15 categories, it's not even eligible for this. And they're working on changes to further limit eligible lands to those Forest Service-owned lands within 2 miles of a population center, and lands managed by the Bureau of Land Management within 5 miles of a population center. So this deals with land that is only in or near a place where people live. And
so he's saying there that this land is going to be near population centers. He says changes are coming to that, though I got a text from his spokesperson today that confirms that those changes are coming, but wouldn't say when. So we haven't seen text or language of what that provision looks like. But they'll be close to population centers. And then this doesn't just put all of our public lands up for sale. It creates a process by which 18.7 million acres in Utah are eligible for a sale. It doesn't mean they will be sold. It doesn't authorize the sale, is what Mike Lee is saying. Do you buy it, or is that his spin on others who feel the land is just going to be sold off?
Perhaps before we get into the details of the bill, I think this is case in point, exactly what I'm talking about with Mike Lee, his personal politics getting in the way of him actually passing policy in the United States Senate.
So?
Well, I think there are this is my opinion, there are a lot of really good elements of this bill. I think Mike Lee takes some elements of a compromise that I know Congresswoman Malloy has been forging. There are some really good pieces of the bill. I think Mike Lee takes it a little bit too far. I think nearly 19 million acres is perhaps beyond what is practical in terms of a compromise. But this is something Utah really needs to do. Utah is unique in the sense that we are the youngest state in the nation. We have the fastest growing population in the country, along with really the strongest economy in the country, yet we are so limited by the fact that 70% of our land is owned by the federal government. There are right now nearly 2.5 million acres of federally owned land within existing city limits. And that's what Senator Lee was talking about, near places where people already live. Now, obviously, we just need to use some common sense here. There are beautiful, pristine wilderness lands close to city limits or in city limits that we should protect. We should not just come at this with a blanket approach. We have got to free up some of this land for development, not just for developers or corporations who often get blamed, but for our kids and our grandkids who cannot afford housing in Utah right now.
But I think that's the ultimate crux of this question is where is the line drawn? Because you're seeing some on the conservation side basically just saying that this makes 18.7 million acres eligible for sale.
Right.
This is
it doesn't
slippery
sell
slope.
them.
No.
It makes those acres
eligible, but still having them eligible means at some point they could be sold, and that's giving people a lot of heartburn.
Yeah, I mean, I think anyone who's lived in a neighborhood where it wasn't developed next to you, and then it gets developed next to you, right? That's what they're worried about. If it is the case that I always brought my grandchildren, right, I went with my grandfather to this river and we would fly fish, and now some private, isn't that the issue in Montana? And I get to switch over to a different state, but like wealthy people buying out access to public land so that you are now unable to do the things that had been generationally right. And what you said earlier, it could be ranching, but it's outdoor recreating, right? It's all the things that we come to love about what it means to live in this beautiful state. I hear you. We have a housing affordability crisis. I mean, that is just ridiculous. We need so many houses to make it possible for people to afford to live here. Obviously, land has to be freed. I think that's fair. But a little bit, it feels like Congresswoman Malloy had a compromise that seemed reasonable.
More tailored.
Yeah, right. Kind of, this is what we actually need. And this just opens the door. So it's eligible to be purchased. And if I'm a super wealthy person and I want to just buy this mountain, right? And now you don't get to hike on it anymore, or the mountain biking you used to do, you can't do anymore. And we've all seen that happen, right? I think that's why people are worried.
Peter, I want you to jump in here because I think you know this issue much better in terms of like, there are some provisions in here though that does stipulate that local governments, right, would have some control and first right of refusal type of things.
There's a bit of a tangle here. So there's a first right of refusal for certain local governments, certain tribal authorities, and I think there is a stipulation that the land is eligible to be developed for housing, right? So something that Senator Lee has emphasized kind of repeatedly here is you're not going to get, permits for oil wells and that kind of thing on this land. It has to be sold for a housing purpose. But something we've run into in our reporting, yesterday we spoke to the Utah Public Lands Alliance. They are mostly concerned with off-highway vehicle access. And they said they've been working with the senator's office on this bill a little bit. And the problem they're running into is they're pretty sure that most of their kind of constituents, off-highway vehicle drivers, are going to be fine at the end of the day. But when they're talking to Senator Lee about some of the language they could fit in, assurances they could get in this bill that the land is going to be used in a certain manner, they're not sure that that's going to pass the parliamentarian, right? Because it has to be strictly budgetary.
Right.
So the question I'm kind of seeing at this point is whether or not this is a good idea. Is the budget the right venue to be doing this if we can't give people the assurances that they need to be comfortable with the sale?
Yeah.
Right? Because this proposal is necessarily so much larger in scale than what, like we said, Congresswoman Malloy was proposing.
And maybe, Taylor, you could elaborate. You said that there were some good parts of this bill and some where Mike Lee has gone too far. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Well, I think what I really like about Celeste Malloy's version and what I really like about Mike Lee's version is opening up the land that is owned by the federal government within existing municipal city limits in Utah, allowing that for housing, but then ultimately having the decision about what to do with that land be given to the local government and to those elected officials. What is to stop the
local governments from then selling it to developers?
I think the focus on housing. Well, developers build housing too. So developer is a pejorative. I think
Well, I
we
don't
need
mean
to
it
remember that,
pejoratively. I
right,
just
but a
mean people who
developer,
develop housing.
right, a developer would need to buy the land to come in and put in the infrastructure to then create the housing, right, for Utahns to buy. I think we have to be careful about setting too many limits on the free market there. I think the market is part of it. Ultimately, as a Republican, I do believe in local control. I want to let those Utah cities and the elected representatives or members of city councils, I want them to be the ones making the decision about how that land is used within city limits. And it should be for the benefit of Utahns and housing.
Leah, I'm going to let you make the last point before we wrap for the day.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it should be. And that's the rub, right?
Yeah.
Like cities will be incentivized, I think, to sell the land, and then they can't control that. All I just have in my head is when wealthy people, right, are buying like a bunch of property, and now all of a sudden I can't fish here anymore. And I think your point, the free market, I'm all with you, capitalism, great. But when we think about why people are worried about it, and it doesn't seem like there's super tight provisions, it doesn't actually require that it be housing, it just prioritizes housing, I think, that's where I'm concerned.
Yeah, well, we'll have to see how it all plays out. There will be more discussions to be had for sure. Leah Murray, Taylor Morgan, thank you both for your insights today. We appreciate it. And as always, you can find our broadcast version of Inside Utah Politics on ABC4 Sundays at 8 a.m. and 4 p.m. is when that show airs. So I invite you to join us there as well. And we will see you again soon.